Hey, welcome everybody, and welcome to Talking Niagara this morning. And hey, there you go, Dave. Gary's saying thanks for lunch yesterday.
Hey, it was my pleasure, Gary. Until yesterday, I didn't know that Gary and I were gay, but apparently he considered me his date.
Okay.
And also, Gary was healed by Ernest Angsley. Apparently, got hit on the head and was healed. But I don't think Ernest had all his was his best day because Gary's still Gary.
Yeah, well, we love Gary, just the way it is, right? We love Gary and we can't help him.
Way too interesting a man.
Yeah. All right. But hey, if he'd have been saved, it wouldn't be as interesting, right?
I hate to see what happened to Ernest Angsley after that.
Yeah, there you go.
And
there you go. Yeah. Morning, Mike. And Gary saying explain. I think we love you. We'll leave you at that, eh?
Yeah. So Gary was a very interesting conversations as always that day. Talked also about the waste that was the chemical waste and stuff that was buried here and there in barrels. Somebody joined us for briefly and talked about, I think his father used to point out where they used to bury the
barrels, and other waste,
chemicals and stuff like that. Yeah. So it was interesting. As Gary is nothing but interesting.
Yeah. All right. So,
a lovely granddaughter. He showed me a picture of his granddaughter. Lovely granddaughter.
Well, there you go. Beautiful. Okay. And what did he just say? I'm not sure what that means. All right. Okay. So, moving on. So, Ford scores his fourth political endorsement in Niagara Falls, in Niagara region, being that of councilors and a councilor and the mayor in Niagara-on-the-Lake.
Yes.
Not surprising, really. Not surprising.
Yeah, this not really. This is not really a big deal. We'll just kind of go over quickly that his appointment, progressive conservative appointment for Niagara-on-the-Lake is I just lost it. Weens, I think his name is Erwin Weens.
Owen Weens, yeah, the deputy Lord
Mayor. And they were there. Yeah, when that was Lord Mayor. Who is his appointee? No, the mayor. I think the Lord Mayor is Gary Zalapa, is it not?
No, Edwin Weens is the deputy Lord Mayor.
Oh, okay. So anyway, yeah. So Weens is very appreciative, and so is the mayor, of the things that the Ford government has done. A lot of it into agriculture and irrigation. I think they mentioned here. So we'll see how Weens does in the next election. I don't think Ford will have much trouble moving to the top of the heap in really rapid succession. It is an expense we don't need to have. The $200 checks that he give everybody to buy their vote didn't really need to happen. He would have got the got the majority anyway. We'll see, but it was a good day for Ford actually, because he got praises. The mayor himself would not, of course, endorse him, as other mayors in the region have endorsed the Ford, and he felt that was not his place to endorse any political candidate, which I agree with. Mayor himself said that, of course he's worked with Weems.
Yeah, exactly. Because the thing is, let's think about it. There's a lot of people out there, and I'm not praising them or hating them or anything like that. There's a lot of people out there that do not like Doug Ford. It's the fact of life. It is what it is, and a mayor is in the city as representing people who like Doug Ford and don't like Doug Ford, right? In equal numbers, probably. So in some respects, I think it's not right. It's not right, given that mayors don't have political parties in the Ontario political makeup. It's not right, really. They give endorsements. I'm not sure it's correct.
Yeah. Well, Matt Cisco, Diodati, and Frank Campion of Welland, Cisco of St. Catharines, of course, Jim from here, all endorsed them. Diodati actually publicly endorsed him in 2022 election. So you'll see a shift here. Back in the day, it wasn't too long ago that they were all liberals. Basically, the strongest ones in the council were liberals. Just about every councilor was a liberal. Wolsey as mayor was one of the differences in those days when he was a mayor for 7 years. He was a dyed-in-the-wool conservative, but we find this the shift towards the right everywhere.
Well, in fact, actually, at the last election, if you noticed, new signs by Jim Diodati were out there in blue. Older signs were in red.
I didn't notice that. No, I didn't notice that at all.
No. Both Thompson and Diodati, newer signs were blue and older signs were red. I think there's been a shift in allegiance.
Yeah, for a long time, Niagara Falls was staunch liberal.
Yeah.
Now, of course, we vote for who we like, and Wayne Gates is well liked, and he's an NDP, and Tony Baldinelli has taken the torch off of Nicholson for federal, and they are well solid too. Yeah. So we have a unusual situation here in Niagara Falls where we vote for the person we like more than the party. During the interview with Lori Lococo yesterday, Paul had Lori Lococo on his show, Voice of Niagara, and Lori mentioned late in the show that she has voted for 4 different parties at different times. Sometimes she decides that a party or a person or a policy, that's what she votes for more than she does staunchly or loyally vote for a certain party, which I think every citizen should actually do as well. And I think that if Ernest Angley, I put this in a comment and Paul's show too. So to get back to the Ernest Angley thing, if Ernest Angley whacked Councilor Coco in the head, she may turn into a Trump. I don't know.
There you go.
I don't think I only made that joke because it was Paul and it was and Gary's listening now. So Gary says that's the man who Dad and Grandpa used to dump barrels of waste in Simon property. Yes, that was the fellow who was there. We're talking.
That's what I thought you meant, Gary. I thought you were meaning other than cyanamide, but because you've already told us some of the cyanamide secrets, but some of the other ones would be interesting as well. Yeah, and we
I was
know,
talking
for
to
example, the dump either side of Lococo's.
many years ago. I was talking to a fellow that was out around Snyder Way, and he was digging in his farm field there, and he found all kinds of barrels buried there, barrels of chemical waste or oil waste. It was
Yeah.
just dug in a big hole and put there, and then they'll had to be removed. So we don't know where these guys got these companies did this stuff.
Yeah.
And to be fair to them, they didn't really think that was such a big deal back then too. It was just an easy way.
Well, they just give this trash to somebody, to a contractor, and say, get rid of it. We don't want to know where. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Moving on. So this relates to a discussion we had yesterday, but city councilors have awarded 70,000 towards expanding the scope of a single room occupancy study that is going to be looking at motels and motel rooms and conversion of motel rooms to housing. This is a study that's ongoing and will be reporting in 2026. So they've just approved the next phase of this plan, if you like.
Yeah, this is something they haven't addressed, and they should have addressed, and they are addressing it now. Single room occupancy, or as a review originally reported on, boarding houses, boarding rooms. Now, of course, a boarding house is a place where you rent a room and you share facilities. Because Niagara Falls has so many of these small sort of hotels up on around Lundy's Lane and that, some of them are already being used for single family or single room occupancy.
Yeah.
What they want to do is sort of regulate that and make it legal so that they can regulate the single room occupancy. So these hotels can be converted to pretty much big boarding houses where each different room is a rented unit, something like an apartment, but a very small apartment, a single room occupancy, they call it. In that way, they can provide a very affordable, cheap place for an individual to live. I think we need that in a big, big way right now. That could be a hedge against further homelessness and further destitution for some people.
Yeah.
There are, I think, 2,150 possible SROs out there, and if they begin to be recognized and regulated, then people of humble means can get a room. Right now, it goes based on demand. During the summertime, they have to get rid of the people who live there, and then the rates go up, and they give it to tourists. When the housing rent went way up, so did these single rent occupancies, single room occupancies. They also go up. So if they can be regulated and standardized like a regular rental unit, then you can have a person can actually find a place to live. And it's one room. It has a bathroom and a shower. It probably has like a 30-year-old TV in it, but so what? And a microwave, maybe a little hot.
Yeah, but a lot of people actually bring their, sometimes bring their own equipment, don't they? If they've got it.
I think most of them have like a.
But you're right, a 30-year-old TV. Yeah.
I've been to the Candlelight, which is the one right behind Michelangelo's. I was there several times and saw the rooms that were there and the people living in them. And in one particular case, there was a single father who had 3 little daughters in between jobs and that. And so and of course, that was the social services that set them up there. At that time, they were allowed only about 3 months before they had to move out or find a different place, but it was a stopgap. What they're doing now is probably like even a couple can live in a place like that In this particular case that I'm talking about, a guy had 3 little daughters, and he was the single father. And between jobs, they were healthy kids, well dressed, clean, and all that. But and the father was the same, and obviously it was just between jobs and stuff that needed a little hand. But this could be one of the answers to the growing homeless problem. We can interrupt that decline. So if somebody loses their house or can't afford rent, they could presumably afford a single.
Well, again, the argument has been that also matches onto the same demand for tiny homes, where you could build effectively the same sort of thing up of tiny home, a small place that has a small living area, small bed, somewhere to sleep, and a bathroom and kitchenette type thing, purpose built, that is about the same kind of square footage as these places.
That is, well, right now that these rooms already exist.
Yeah,
and
I know
and
these
that's a big
rooms
difference.
exist, whereas
to go out and acquire land and start building tiny homes is going to take time. It's going to take initiative.
Oh, I know, but the actual council has actually already pushed back on the use of tiny homes.
Yeah, because they really don't know what they're going to look like. One of the things you don't want to, even here, you don't want to concentrate a lot of poor people in one place. That's another thing you don't want to do. You want to, even here on Lundy's Lane, where the BIA don't know where they stand in this particular case, if you concentrate a lot of poor people in one place, it could have an economic detriment to the area.
Yeah. Well, some of these motels,
take a whole lot of poor people and put them in one place. However, Lundy's Lane is a unique situation where there are, or other places in town where there is a number of these places that are underutilized.
Yeah.
And if they're regulated, they can be turned into nice little, basically one-room apartments.
Yeah. Well, the one interesting thing about some of these motels on the lane is that some of them have been kind of nice front motels for tourists and rear motels for for homeless. So a dual purpose motel.
I don't know. Can you give me that again?
What I said is there's been some examples of motels on Lundy's Lane whereby, at the front, they've got this nice motel which is open to the open for tourism.
Yes.
Behind it, they've got the older, dilapidated part of the motel that has been used for homeless people.
Yes, let's put the dilapidated. Let's put the people in the dilapidated. Well, the whole thing about regulations, they can't be dilapidated anymore.
I know.
They have to be brought up to standard.
When I said dilapidated, I'm just trying to express a view that they're the more seedy part of that motel, if you like.
Yeah. Now, of course, the idea is not to concentrate them all in one spot and to push them around. But if they have, and spread them around. But if there are 2,150 potential single room occupancies, that could really, really help things out.
Yeah.
Well,
and when you think about it, how many motels do you go around in the city and you look at and you think, well, that's not in use for tourism. Even peak season, there's not more than 1 or 2 cars in the lot.
Well, once they started concentrating the hotel rooms in and around the Falls View, basically, that had a detrimental effect on the hotels up and down Lundy's Lane. Now, I worked with guys who sold their homes, like single guys who were millwrights or iron workers or whatever, and they would rent these places for for basically 10 months out of the year and live in them dirt cheap, because the hotels wanted anybody to be in the room and collecting some sort of money from that. The idea then, it was remarkably inexpensive to do that, but now, because there is so high of rents and stuff, that some of these places have taken advantage of it.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. And it's the taking advantage that I'm not keen on.
Yeah. So the regulations accepting that this is a viable residency, that a person can basically rent that, rent it, pay the rent, and have a secure place to live, can get out of the cold, and a lot of people may be able to draw enough money to pay a rent on something like that. Good morning, Karen.
So Randy's saying, what difference can regulation make to a practice that has been going on since before the 80s? The rooms exist, the occupancy exists. This is a reach in bureaucracy that Niagara and those homeless don't need. The city's property standards, Ontario Building Code, already apply completely. Yes, I agree. They do.
Now, that's a different take on it, but the idea of regulating it, because these are not permanent, them will become permanent homes. Right now, they're not. So the room, you're right. This has already happened, but what happens quite often is they're chased out of their rooms during the summertime.
Yeah.
When the tourist season's going up. But this is a permanency. This would be
exactly
pretty much an extension to the regulations we put on any other rental unit.
Yeah.
And accept the fact that they exist, and protect the occupancy. Really, you can standardize the rents. You can the same regulatory rules and regulations as an apartment building would come into play. And when that doesn't happen, the occupant of any particular room are vulnerable to eviction at any time, because they're not a permanent resident. So
exactly. Yeah.
At least not legally.
Yeah. Okay. So Karen was saying in the beginning of this idea, the motels were not winterized, which many of them are now. They've been winterized now, right? But although many of those are still probably substandard. Mike's pointing out that we've had another water main break in the city, 29th of the year. And Randy, whether a hotel is full of tourism or residents, what difference does it make? Full is full, regardless of where in the city they exist. Yes. Yeah. And Betty's saying good morning. So what do we call a trailer court?
Well, trailer. Well,
a trailer park. Yeah.
Trailer park. Yeah. Well, of course, there's always the joke of trailer trash.
Yeah.
Yeah,
but again, let's get away from that kind of terminology. People need homes, and people are getting desperate. They need homes. They need support.
Well, that's the idea. I'm afraid that's going to happen. The old idea of trailer trash, but you could have a trailer park for the homeless people, But like I said before, the concentrating a whole lot of homeless people in one area might not be the greatest idea.
No. I understand it. Also, Randy is saying we're paying $70,000 for a study of big hotel that big hotels want to say not near us unless it is that's making the money, right? Yeah, in a way, you're right. Morning, Nancy. Yep. Have a good day, Nancy. We love you. All right. And continuing what Randy's saying, if they're directed towards permanent residencies, does that not bring Ontario rental standards into play? Absolutely, it does. As soon as that person, whether they're paying their rent weekly, daily or monthly. If they've been there more than 28 days, then a new rule, the Ontario standard lease applies. They are actually now residential tenants, and getting people out of a long-term tenancy is just as awkward as it is, whether they be tenants or in a motel.
Here's a quote by Councilor Victor Pietrangelo. I think everyone that I talk to is in full agreement in terms of having standards and creating a living condition for whoever is living in these SROs that is respectable and presentable. That's what he says. We are kind of stuck in a holding pattern right now because we don't have any rules, regulations, or standards, and therefore we can't go out and enforce anything. Now, I don't know, and of course, Randy's right. They're going to dump $70,000 for an updated study on this. So I don't know where Ontario standards and their regulatory body and what the city bylaws have and the differences between them and what criteria that happens, whether it's the city or the province. But yeah, Randy makes a good point there. Well, isn't it already going to be Ontario standards and that? But they have this 2019 boarding house interim control study recommended to the municipality, the city's planning, and I think it has to do with planning and zoning, I suppose. That is the framework for. And Randy says, we have now established we have all the rules and regulations already in place. Well,
agreed, we do.
Agree here. They're talking about official plan and zoning bylaws to establish licensing framework, which is part of the city, I guess, and what their obligations are. And staff have engaged the public about SROs, including business improvement associations and Niagara Regional Community Services, city's fire bylaw enforcement development, in consensus, SRA should be legalized and regulated. So who does what? I don't know. It looks like all bylaw stuff and how whatever the city has to do with this some way, zoning and all the other things that the city do. It's not explained. It just talks about those things. And the chief administrative officer, Jason Burgess, said SRO concentrations is something that will be part of the study staff. So Randy is saying the rules and regulations are already out there, and but the council is stressing over this interim. They don't have this fully regulated in their.
I understand where Randy's coming from, because why are we spending more money on these kinds of things? And it seems one of the things we do very often in council is, if we don't want to solve the problem, we spend money on somebody doing a study.
Yeah, and here Lori Lococo chimes in. We need affordable units, she says, adding the city had previously established rights and responsibilities for tenants and SRO owners because there were a lot of people living in squalor in old, decrepit buildings. The BIAs got involved at that point and started talking about buffers and parking and brought a lot to the table about what they wanted to see. Here we are in 2025 and our housing crisis is worse and the city is growing. The price of rentals has dramatically increased. So Lococo said, well, the SROs are more information is needed. I think the question is where in the city these are acceptable and pointing to recent neighborhood concerns about homeless and transitional shelters on Surma Street in Buchanan. So, yeah, there could be regulations already out there, but obviously the council doesn't see it that way, and they want some more permanence in this. Now, I can't tell you legally what the city needs to contribute to this. Although I do know that in the past, like the residences of these places that were renting them were sort of shown the door around summertime.
Yeah. Yeah, but again, under RTA rules, these people do have rights once they've been there more than 28 days.
Well, I don't know. Randy might be completely right that you don't need any more regulation. Just go ahead and do it. Keep doing what you're doing. So he's suspecting that there's $70,000 that need not be spent, I suppose.
Yeah, and I would have a tendency to agree with him, but also I also conscious that we have a city that makes rash decisions without doing any studies at other times.
Well, obviously they had something going on in 2019 in a 2019 boarding house study, but they didn't act on it, or they didn't fully.
I don't think they understood the implications of it at the time.
I don't know.
Yeah,
it's interesting. We'll see what goes forward. Now, Randy has a good point there. Aren't these things already in place?
Yeah. All right. Homeowners brace for higher insurance rates across Canada. A number of things that have come into play. We've had wildfires, hailstorms, hurricanes, and natural disasters over the last few years, which have really pushed up insurance rates across the country. And further is that the Insurance Bureau of Canada is saying there's not really any safe place, a low risk place to live. They're all potentially at risk, because we had those, was it 2 summers ago, we had the fires across northern Ontario that many people could smell in southern Ontario.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if they did a whole lot of property damage, those fires in northern Ontario. It did, of course, do a lot to our forests up there, and it made a big. But I don't know how much property or whatever was destroyed up there.
The other thing about this is that one of the comments that I've seen in the last few days is that tariffs are likely to put the cost of insurance up for a variety of reasons, not the least because if it costs more to import stuff, parts, and whether you're fixing a car from an accident or whether you're repairing a house, stuff costs money.
Well, yeah, but this hasn't got anything to do with that. This is due to what they call weather events, the changing weather, and of course you can. This could be legitimate, or you could put some cynicism to it, which we tend to do. There has been a number of incidences where the insurance companies had to pay out a lot of money, and of course they say, well, we can't help but raise the rates because of the changing weather.
Yeah,
it's just the fact that they can now, because they've had a series of events happening that could be just coincidental, have nothing to do with the weather, that they will use that excuse to boost people's rates.
Well, they're basically saying here between July and August, 4 catastrophic weather events occurred, including flooding in Toronto and other parts of southern Ontario that cost $940 million. The Jasper wildfire cost $880 million. the Calgary hailstorm cost 2.8 billion, and flooding in regions of Quebec amounted to 2.5 billion.
Yes. So
what's watching through here?
Now it says here this led to more than 250,000 insurance claims, 50% more than Canadian insurers typically receive in an entire year. But this was 1 or 2 years. So they say their expectations are these things are going to get worse going forward. And we find that those big fires in Los Angeles, a lot of those houses were not covered by insurance because insurance refused to cover them. In Florida, at different times, the state itself has had to step in and being the underwriter for insurance claims because insurance companies either were too high or they refused to insure a place. That's becoming more and more the case, where insurance companies do not want to insure certain areas if they are prone to fires. Like in and around Los Angeles is always prone to fires, particular different times of the year, and people still continue to build on areas that are vulnerable to fires. You'll find also in the States that even here in Canada, I imagine that certain traditional areas where people have built on floodplains before there were regulations against it cannot get insurance.
Yeah. Well, floodplains is the worst of these things. And of course, with things like thundering waters going up, and that was definitely on a floodplain, you know, we should be concerned.
Well, they say people in every part of the country have been affected in recent years by one event or another, and we're seeing the risk rise everywhere. Now, my point here is, we've had a spate of high insurance events, high insurance payout events, but that may go the other way. It could be 2 decades before we have those situations happen again.
Well, I was going to say, you know, the challenge here is that the insurance industry uses the reinsurance industry to hedge its bet against these, you know, once in a decade events, once every, you know. So when these events pile up, the reinsurance, you know, the use of insurance and reinsurance is supposed to actually help us, and we don't suffer the consequences. The homeowners don't suffer the consequences.
Some years ago, maybe 20 or more years ago, and a woman who had taken quite a bit of interest in all of this and the changing weather events. She went to Lloyd's of London, and sadly I can't remember her name, but I remember reading the article. She went to Lloyd's of London and warned them that their analysis of the situation was wrong, that they're going to have to pay out to insurance companies more than they think they are going to. Of course, Lloyd's of London are the company that insures insurance companies. And her analysis of the situation was that things are going to you're going to have to pay out a lot more than you think you're going to do. They rejected that because they had their own analysis that was wrong, and she happened to be right. Now, it must be pointed out that you see a lot of places, like they talked about these weather changing events that were the problem. I'm not so sure that is always the case. Take, for instance, Florida, for instance. Anytime a hurricane or incident goes through there, it's a lot of money has to be paid out. There's a lot of insurance claims, but this has a lot less to do with the weather. Quite often is the concentration of populations. When they compare it to previous times, and they see the insurance payout a lot less, and that's because there was a lot less people living there. And Florida's population has grown quite a bit, and thereby, when they do have an event coming through, it affects a lot more people than it did before. So it might not have anything to do with changing weather. It might have to do more with where the amount of people that live in that area.
Okay, Randy points out one thing though that's got to be taken into consideration. Insurance companies are in business for profit. Profit should not be determined, but he believes that profit should not be determined on the backs of horrific hardship. I.e., as soon as an event occurs, we shouldn't be paying to load up the insurance company's coffers.
Well, that's right. That's why, like the state of Florida had stepped in some years ago to underwrite some insurance because they couldn't get insurance companies to do it. I forget what that program was. I read about it. It had a variety of success.
This was because of the repeat hurricanes and tornado alleys, etc.
Yeah, and people building in those areas, and that was. It may not have a whole lot in that particular case. May not have a whole lot to do with weather, because the hurricanes are going to come and the tropical storms are going to come.
In fact, actually,
that was people that live in those areas now compared to previous time.
Yeah, in fact, actually, people knew where hurricanes hit in Florida and tended to avoid those areas back in the day. You had a 25-mile stretch because statistically, it was more likely that the hurricane was going to make landfall in that 25-mile stretch. And therefore, people avoided it to live in. They'd live north of that stretch or south of that stretch, but leave that stretch alone. Just have nice roads through that stretch, but now that isn't the case because that's now lived in. That's prime land now.
Yeah, because the demand for Florida properties went up. If you ever go down to Florida, it was the dream of so many people in the northern states. When they retired, they go to Florida.
Yeah.
Everybody that I ever met down there that were living in condos or whatever had originally lived in the northern states. And they went down there. Once they retired, they sold their stuff in Ohio or New York or whatever, Connecticut, and moved to Florida because of the milder weather, that kind of thing. And so there was a huge demand for Florida properties and residencies and so on. So that was part of the problem, the expanded population. Now, what the last comment was there was the insurance companies, of course, are in the business of making money. But so I'll put this out there: should the state take over and provide insurance for people when insurance companies do not come forward? Do we socialize insurance like we did the healthcare industry? Is it the right of an individual to have insurance?
Yeah, that's actually a fair question because, okay, so Betty just made the point, or is it the act of God, they say, right? Acts of God, well, when you get in a stretch of Florida coastline, you get it pounded by hurricanes on a regular basis. That's not an act of God. That's may be what you call an act of God, but it's a predictable event. You know that along the Florida coastline, that certain places are going to get hit with certain regularity with hurricanes. It's a fact of life.
What happened?
Hurricane season, they're predicting there's a 19.5% chance that our town is going to get hit by this hurricane.
I think there's the act of God thing, the once in 100-year event type thing that happened in North Carolina. They are less likely to be hit that badly by hurricane effects. That you would think maybe be an anomaly, but for Florida to be vulnerable to hurricanes and weather events, that's always been the case. So
But remember, this started with a talk about Canadian insurance, not American insurance.
Yeah, I was just going to switch back to Canada too, but I'm afraid they're taking a lot of their prompts from what's happening in insurance companies in the United States, and of course, like Randy says, they're in it to make money, and now they have a good excuse. While they say, "Oh, wow, the changing weather is making everybody much more vulnerable, so insurance rates have to go up." That might not be the case at all. It was a bunch of coincidental events that we can't really. Even weather people will tell you that you can't count on that continually happening.
Yeah,
and quite often, when it is charged as a weather changing event due to climate change, it more often is something to do with the concentration of populations in areas where people didn't used to live. So if a forest fire came through in the old days, no property was damaged. But if a forest fire goes through now, there are communities in the way.
Yeah, exactly. You got
population.
Yeah, you got those Northern Ontario forest fires that happened, and when nobody lived there, who cared?
Yeah, and also what's not factored into this, they blame weather change for climate change for a lot of the forest fires, but forest management was done incorrectly for many years. They stopped fires from happening, and the underbrush in certain forests were allowed to build up unnaturally. So when they did have a fire, it got out of control because they had an unnatural amount of underbrush that was tinder for the fire to continue.
And that's what enabled it to jump the barriers.
Yeah, remember, forest fires are a natural event for a forest. A lot of the seeds don't germinate unless there's been a fire.
Yeah, because we used to build in. Yeah, we used to build in fire gaps, but then nobody maintained the fire gaps.
The problem was forest management, and
exactly.
The undergrowth in the forest was loud because they would extinguish fires right away, and the smaller fires, and they wouldn't let them burn, and this caused this accumulation of debris on the forest floors, which was unnatural. Because what you have to do is let the forest burn in certain areas so that the natural cycle can happen. And we made the mistake of trying to save every tree, and then when we did that, the accumulation of debris on the forest floor made it impossible to stop the big fire next time. So what the idea is now is, when a forest, let the forest burn like it's supposed to do, and just kind of redirect the forest away from communities, the fire away from communities. But you can't do that when you have a big fire and there's a lot of kindling, and you can't count on the fire to burn itself out the way it used to.
Yeah. Okay.
So and unfortunately, that's attributed to climate change. In fact, it was forest management that was to blame for a lot of the big fires.
Yeah, exactly. And it's been misattributed, and anyway, so it's where we are, and that's why we have this mess with insurance right now. Okay, moving on. Wayne Gates wants to have Marineland closed permanently.
Well, I think everybody does, don't you?
Well, yes and no. I want the creatures taken away, but I would like to see Marineland become a nice, a lovely resort place, somewhere we can actually enjoy ourselves, rides, etc.
Well, that's what Gates has said himself, right? Just get the animals out of there, put something else in its place. However, it looks like prime real estate to me. it may go over to condos and other things. I think Gary and I talked about that the other day
Yeah.
too. The Marineland would.
I think it would be a disaster.
Condos overlooking the river, kind of thing.
I think it would be a disaster to go to condos. I think we need to. I think we want to. We need to have like another, a replacement for Marineland.
Yeah, definitely. The Marineland idea is old-fashioned, and it's needless right now. We don't need to have animals in captivity like that.
No, we don't.
If they wanted to make it a zoo of some kind, they could. There are real good zoos that you could establish that house endangered animals so that they can be reintroduced to habitat later on. If you want to do something like that, that would be great. It would be very interesting to do that. If you could establish zoos for endangered species, which they do have here and there, and that would be a great idea. However, I think, I don't know if you're going to put an amusement park there. It's large enough that you could put a sort of a mini Canada's Wonderland there. That would be great for the kids.
No, I think a Wonderland, something like Wonderland, would be a good idea. I don't know how mini Wonderland it is because I think there's a lot of acreage there.
Well, that you need investment to do that, and I think that would be. I think it would be a great idea because it would bring down a lot of tourists, a lot more tourists coming, even just for the day. They'll bring money into the town.
And I think it's short-sighted to allow it to move over to housing.
But that's what I expect will happen.
I expect it as well, but I do believe it's short-sighted.
Yeah, and let's face it, we are a tourist town, so we have to have entertainments for tourists.
Yeah, exactly.
And if you remove that property from the tourist sort of industry, then how do you replace it?
Yeah, and we know there are past scandals involving that town. We're not going there. We're not, past scandals in Marineland are not part of this discussion. We're talking about what we need to do moving forward.
Yeah. So basically Gates is saying pretty much what most people said: no more captive animals in this place.
Yeah.
Use it for something else.
Well, in fact, I've just noted in searching around the web, there's a headline here: Marineland needs a new path forward without animals. And this comes from the Ontario NDP. And it's an article that was written by Wayne Gates back in August of 23, where he's talking about exactly the same thing about, let's move forward without animals. Let's have amusements here.
Randy has pointed out that Marineland has applied for severance, which will allow it to sell off and develop the free space and leave the animals behind. So there's your answer right there. If it's broken up, it will less likely be tourist facilities there.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. But the main thing is Marineland is an old-fashioned type of amusement. People were thrilled by these huge killer whales and seals and walruses and all that.
Yeah, it's a matter of, and I have to admit, I stick my hand up and say to see a killer whale perform is a matter of, real interesting. It's really interesting to see that, right?
But even when I looked at it, I was amazed at the kind of things they could teach killer whale, but also you could see the place they were performing and it was very small. And every time you see an animal like that, you know that's not a good place for an animal like that.
Oh, I know. And that's the double-edged sword about it, is that people like you and I, we go there, we see the wow factor. We're like, wow, I love the animals. I love how they are, but this isn't the right place for them.
Yeah. but we are matured as a society now too.
Yeah.
Our zoos are like the new Toronto Zoo is much better placed than the old ones were. If you remember, it was like a little concrete cage, and you'd have a gorilla sitting, looking very unhappy in a corner of a concrete cage, so somebody could look at it.
And
So we have a more mature society now. We are much
yeah.
more knowledgeable, and we don't accept that.
And just for the record, Betty, I've never been to Marineland, but I have seen the killer whale show in another park in another country. All right.
I think we went there with the school trips. The Like, not me, but when my kids were going to school, they would have
Yeah.
these
Oh yeah.
school trips, and they would go. That's how I saw them.
Yeah, I get you. I've never been to Marineland, and as I say, the only time I've ever been was, I forget where it was, but there was a killer whale show, and I was really quite amazed by it. But also at the same time, my thinking went to how do they live here? Because these are creatures that live in the ocean, in the deep ocean.
Yeah, they can't be happy.
Yeah.
It's like I said, our society has evolved.
Yeah. Oh yeah, we have. And when you think about it, one of the lasting memories I have of advertising Canada when I didn't used to live here is the Marineland song. Everybody loves Marineland, right? Come to Marineland, Canada. You know, well known international Niagara Falls and Marineland were put together in an advert and have been that way for many, many years.
Yeah, so I think it's I don't think that.
Randy,
I think it's no longer acceptable.
Yeah. And Randy, I get it. You were a contractor there, so yep, absolutely. You did work in the place. Absolutely, credit to you.
Yeah, and you would have way more insights than the rest of us. You saw what was going on behind the scenes.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So we are in that situation really where it's got to be closed, but it's got to be used for something else. Tourist.
Yeah, but Randy's pointed out there are severances there, so there's no guarantee that's going to switch over to
exactly.
area.
Yeah. Okay. One of the moving on again. One of the things that Trump has been concerned about and talking about in the press a lot is Canadian fentanyl crossing the border. But apparently, there is a big problem with Canadian fentanyl production. But apparently, the issue is that it's going to Australia rather than US.
Yeah, which tells you because the U.S. market is so close, there must be some successes in restricting Canadian fentanyl from going into the States, because their new market area is Australia, and the Australians have seen a large uptick in fentanyl coming into the country. They were not too affected by fentanyl or methamphetamine, but they find that more and more Canadian fentanyl and methamphetamine are coming into Australia, which tells you that the easy market in the South is not so easy anymore. In the States, it's not so easy anymore. So they're finding other markets for it, and they figured out ways of smuggling it into Australia. And of course, that's going to be a problem for the Australians because they're not ready for it. They haven't. It wasn't a big problem for them of late. So the fentanyl production in Canada, of course, it's for the domestic market. I think they had something like 500 and something labs or whatever. There's all kinds of labs. Sometimes they're mobile labs, so they're very hard to detect. And what they're finding is that the cartels or whatever are finding it profitable to send the fentanyl and methamphetamine all the way to Australia. When the Chinese send the drugs, the foundational drugs to make fentanyl to Mexico, they're not sending, that's a long way to send it to make a product, but it is
a long way. Yeah.
It's an extremely low bulk, high profit, very low bulk, high profit item. It is so concentrated that a very small amount can be
a couple of kilos is
many doses.
Yeah, a couple of kilos is maybe tens of millions of dollars.
Yeah, it mentions it in the article, actually, if I can bring that article up.
Yeah, anyway, we're kind of running out of time anyway. We can come back to this one tomorrow, I suggest.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll start
anyway,
tomorrow. Yeah.
Thanks, everybody, for participating. Thank you, Randy, for your insights. And anyway, without further ado, I bid you adieu. I don't like what's happening in the ceasefire in Gaza, but pray for peace.